Hi, I am Sherlock. Welcome to my new mystery case.
It was a bitter March evening, the sort of night when the fog does not so much roll in from the river as rise from the very stones of Baker Street and hang in a damp curtain before the lamps. Our fire burned cheerfully, and Holmes, long stretched upon the settee with his dressing-gown drawn close and his pipe sending thin spirals to the ceiling, had passed the better part of an hour in that sphinx-like repose which so often preceded his most vigorous activity. I had been reviewing the proofs of a small monograph on cranial fractures when a cab drew up, swiftly, and with the urgency that suggests the driver has been over-tipped to spare the horse. Mrs. Hudson's step, accompanied by a rustle of damp skirts and the click of a reluctant latch, preceded the entrance of a gentleman whose face and manner bore the imprint of sleeplessness. He was no common visitor to our modest rooms. His coat was of a cut and cloth one does not see in the ordinary trade, and his hat, beaded with mist, might have been new yesterday, were it not that its brim showed a nervous kink, as if its owner had wrung it in transit. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" said he, standing just within the threshold. Holmes did not rise. He regarded the visitor as an osprey might regard a fish that has leaped of its own accord. "Pray come nearer to the fire, Sir Alistair," he murmured, "and warm those hands. Scotch blood does not forgive London's river damp. You will leave water on the carpet else, and Mrs. Hudson's vengeance is not a matter to be lightly contemplated." Our guest started, laid his hat gingerly on the table, and moved towards the hearth with the obedience of a schoolboy. "You know me, then," he managed. Holmes's fingers fluttered once, a pianist testing keys. "Your signet, which you have put on your right hand, though nature intended it for the left, still bears a trace of sealing wax, green, house colour, under the rim. The crest engraved upon it I have noted in Debrett. Your driver reeks of fish and paraffin, which tells me he came direct from Hungerford Pier. A gentleman of rank who hires a river cab on a foggy night must be either desperate or late for an assignation. Your face says the former, your hat the latter. Not with a lady you would have powdered the brim with a gloved thumb rather than kinked it, but with a man whose temper is firmer than your own. Hence, Sir Alistair MacLeod, late of the 17th, heir to a threadbare northern line, now engaged in a matter requiring both secrecy and speed." Sir Alistair gave a hoarse laugh that ended in a cough. "By God, Mr. Holmes, if you are not a witch, you are the next thing to it. I am driven to you in consequence of a devilry at my house in Cheyne Walk. I can say no more in the hall." "Then say it in the chair nearest the fire," said Holmes, indicating the seat opposite him. "Dr. Watson will favour us with attention, and should fortune prove unkind, his medical case." I laid aside my proofs and drew nearer. The visitor's hands, broad and capable in their bones, twitched now and again towards his breast, where a small bundle lay wrapped in a dark kerchief. He sat, and we waited as he gathered himself. "It will sound absurd," he began. "You may send me away for troubling you, but within these last 2 nights, in the very grate of my drawing-room, there has appeared first a glow when no coal was laid, and then this." He unwrapped the kerchief and exposed a ring, plain at first glance, yet singular when the light took it. It was a band of gold, blackened in places as if licked by flame, with a thin seam of greenish stain along the inner bevel. Verdigris, I thought, though how copper's rot should kiss gold I could not say. The gem, if gem it was, had been wrenched out of the setting, leaving a bitten oval that seemed almost to resent the absence. Within the band, in a neat, old-fashioned hand, the inscription read E to L, 1878. Alongside, under the soot, I glimpsed the faintest impress of a maker's mark, a tiny star, or perhaps aster, cut so shallow the gold barely yielded. Holmes did not put out his hand. He leaned forward with that particular stillness I had come to associate with the instant before a hawk stoops. "Start from the beginning," he said. "Omit nothing. A foolish trifle, rightly placed, is worth a regiment of grand facts." Sir Alistair fixed his eyes on the ring as if it might leap back into flame of its own accord. "Yesterday evening? No, that is wrong. The thing began the night before at 11 of the clock. I had been in my library working through a stack of letters. When I entered the drawing-room to ring for hot water, I found the grate, empty, mind you. The housemaid had laid no coal for the morning, giving off a pale glow, blue as a corpse's lips and steady as a vigil light. There was no heat. I put my hand within the bars and felt naught but the ordinary chill. I took it for some trick of London fog and the river, a reflection perhaps. I retired and thought little of it. Last night, again near 11, there came a smell, sharp as lucifer matches, with something of fish scales and river mud. I went down and found the glow once more. When I stirred the cinders with the poker, something rolled to the front. This ring, damp as if brought up from the Thames, yet blackened like a thing come straight from a live coal. The grate was cold, Mr. Holmes, the cinders were cold. But the smell, my God, that smell! "Blue luminescence, fishy reek," murmured Holmes. "Pray proceed." I sent at once for my steward, Mr. Blaine, who is a sober man and no friend to fancy. He examined the grate, found nothing amiss with the flue or the draught, and swore the housemaid had not laid so much as a piece of coke. The ring is none of ours. My wife has shown me each of her boxes. It belongs to no acquaintance, so far as she knows. Yet there is that inscription. I will confess, Mr. Holmes, that the letters E and L, they touch on the oldest part of my family history. My mother was Elizabeth, my father Lachlan. But the date, 78, predates their marriage by a year. I do not know what to think. Holmes's eyes went half-lidded. "And you came to me directly?" "I went first to the police. Inspector Lestrade said I should consult my chimney sweep and consider the matter no more. When I pressed him to take the ring, he said Scotland Yard was not a pawnbroker's, and asked me with a look whether I had been entertaining myself with spirits. He meant drink. I do not drink." Sir Alistair's jaw set, and his fingers closed over the kerchief before he caught himself and let them fall away again. Holmes's long hand moved at last. He took the ring between thumb and forefinger and held it to the lamp. Then, with a movement as delicate as a watchmaker's, he tilted it so the sooty interior faced him. He did not sniff it, as I half expected, but passed it once over the back of his other hand, as if to expose it to a more neutral surface, and then peered again. "You touched it with nothing since last night?" "Only the cloth, as you see. Mr. Blaine wore gloves." "Very good. The stain along the inner bevel, yes. And the setting shows haste, wrenching, not prizing." He laid the ring upon the mantel-shelf beside the tobacco ash, that is to Holmes what a painter's palette is to a dauber, and steepled his fingers. "Dr. Watson, what do you make of our visitor's cold fire?" "I have seen phosphorus used to produce a ghostly glow," said I, recollecting certain boyish experiments, and a hospital orderly with a mischievous bent. "And there is the odour of matches to consider. But how a ring should come damp from a cold grate, unless wrapped in ice and set to melt, yet even then—" Holmes's mouth twitched at one corner. "The world offers us many means of achieving an effect, and very few reasons for it. The means are the child's toys, the reason belongs to men. Sir Alistair, you will oblige me with the exact address in Cheyne Walk, the names of those in your household, and a frank word as to whether there is any person, friend or enemy, who would be served by your humiliation." The colour rose to our visitor's cheek. "I am not easily humiliated, Mr. Holmes." "No man is by his own lights," Holmes returned, not unkindly. "But there are lights other than our own. The address, if you please." Our client named a number I shall not here publish. Holmes's pencil, which had not stirred until now, scratched swiftly. "Your household?" "My wife, Lady Beatrice, my steward, Blaine, 2 housemaids, Mary Dodd and Helen Fitch, 1 footman, a cook, and the boy who runs errands. There is also my wife's companion, Miss Lily Armitage, who has been with her 3 years. No visitors these past days, save my solicitor for an hour yesterday afternoon." Holmes's eyes flicked to the ring and back. "And your solicitor's name?" "Mr. Archibald Vernon of Chancery Lane." Holmes rose at last in a fluid motion that transformed him from reclining scholar to man of action. He slipped the ring into his shabby leather case with as much care as another might reserve for a ruby. "Sir Alister, you will return home at once and behave as though you had not consulted me. Make no comment on the matter to any soul, not even your wife." "Indeed, especially not your wife. Dr. Watson and I will call upon you at 10 tomorrow morning. In the meantime," and here his eyes hardened, "lock your drawing-room and keep the key upon your person. If you are tempted, as all men are, to do otherwise, remember that a second appearance of this curiosity might gratify the author of the trick more than it enlightens you." "Trick?" Sir Alister echoed, his voice lowering. "Then you think—" "I think nothing," Holmes said. "I observe until tomorrow." Sir Alister gathered the kerchief with visible relief at having passed his burden into hands more expert than his own. At the door he turned, as though another thought had tugged his sleeve, and hesitated. "There is one thing more," he said. "On the first night, the night of the glow, I believed the draught had stirred an old paper in the hearth. It fluttered and was still. Last night, when I found the ring, there was no paper at all. An old paper," Holmes repeated softly, as if to himself. "Blue light, fish reek, old paper, thank you, that is of a piece." When the door had closed and Mrs. Hudson's tread receded, Holmes stood in the centre of the room with his head bowed and his hands behind him. The clock on the mantel chimed the quarter. The fog pressed its cold face against our panes. "Watson," he said without looking up, "you were within a hair's breadth of the truth and overleaped it as a hunter might overleap a ditch he has not measured. Phosphorus is a toy, ice, an expedient. But why a ring, and why that inscription? There is our quarry." "You mean to say—" "I mean to say that we shall sleep scant hours, for the dawn finds us upon the river. There is a current which bears not only barges but secrets, and I fancy something has been fished from it and set to burn without heat. The author trusts our eyes and our fears. Tomorrow we will trust our noses and the truth." Dawn found the Thames the colour of old pewter, and a breath like wet linen came off the water as Holmes drew me down the steps at Westminster. He stood with his head inclined, taking in the medley of tar, wet rope, pitch and fish that is the river's reek, then hailed a lighterman and bargained with a coin and a compliment for the loan of the man's lamp. The smoky wick left a greasy smear upon his glove. He folded the rag around it and pocketed the whole as tenderly as a botanist sliding a rare frond between papers. "If our cold fire be theatre, Watson," said he, "the river supplies the orchestra pit. At 10 o'clock we presented ourselves at Cheyne Walk. Sir Alister admitted us without ceremony. He had the fixed look of a man who has watched a door all night. The key to the drawing-room hung upon a narrow ribbon about his neck. No one has entered, he said. Blaine slept in the passage like a sentry. "Then we will begin with what has not happened." Holmes returned and examined the key through his lens. The wards were clean. At the shoulder of the bit there lay a faint varnish-like film, colourless until the light caught it and showed a ghost of green. He nodded, turned the lock, and we passed into a room of correct taste, pale panels, a turkey carpet, the pianoforte under a cover, and the wide steel grate that had, if our client spoke truly, shone with a cold blue fire. Holmes went to his knees on the hearthrug and laid out a little campaign from his pockets, a quill, a card, a glass tube, a narrow steel probe. He lifted from the cinder bed a wedge no larger than a fingernail, translucent at the edge as if cut from onion skin, and caged it in the tube. With the probe he coaxed from the crack beneath the hearthstone a shred of weed, blackened at one tip as though it had touched heat without heat. He drew a fold of clean linen along the bars of the grate and held it to his nose. "There is fish," I ventured, "and the sting of Lucifer matches. Among the ash are white grains that cling. They resemble salt without being salt." "Very good," said he. "Sir Alister, do any in your house keep phosphorus paste for rats?" "To my knowledge, no." "We shall not quarrel with knowledge. We shall verify it." He rang for Blaine. The steward entered, trim and self-contained, with the habit of standing on the balls of the feet that soldiers bring back into civil life. His account was prompt. He had set a chair across the drawing-room door and another across the corridor door, and slept between, like a sentinel in a narrow pass. No one had passed him. No glow had returned. Toward 3 o'clock there had been a taint in the air, as of old tallow and river mud, but it had faded. Holmes thanked him and dismissed him with instructions that no servant was to approach the room. Then his lens travelled as a moth might, across the fender, up the mantel, over the pianoforte. A ribbon of blue peeped from beneath the instrument's cover. He drew it out as a lady would, gently and with her consideration for the fabric. It was short, neatly cut, and carried at one end a circular scurf of paper, the thinnest remnant of a wafer, blue. He balanced it upon his fingertip. "An old paper, and now none," he murmured, and put the ribbon away with the weed and the linen. We were taken next to Lady Beatrice, in a morning room where a pale light lay upon a strip of garden. She was fair, with a composure that suggested effort, and beside her sat Miss Lily Armitage, a dark young woman whose needle pricked a piece of muslin too simple to occupy a quick mind. Holmes's manner with ladies is an odd blend of reverence and scalpel. He admired the blackbird on the lawn, praised the evenness of the stitch, and inquired, by way of gossip, whether blue still ruled the ribbon merchants in Bond Street. "It is the only colour one can be sure of," said Miss Armitage, with a shade too much quickness. Lady Beatrice smiled, but the smile faltered. Holmes asked after their evening. They had retired early. The companion had suffered a headache. Lady Beatrice had read a devotional until the pain abated. There had been no caller and no letter. His questions floated, light, innumerable, polite. Did the errand boy bring the butcher's parcels by the side entrance? At what hour did the cook bank her kitchen fire? Had Mr. Vernon, the solicitor, given satisfaction the previous afternoon? At that last there came the faintest exchange of glances, no more than a bird's flicker, between mistress and companion. Holmes passed it by as though he had not seen it, and asked whether a blue ribbon had lately been missed from the work-basket. "I have many," said Lady Beatrice, and her hand moved to the basket with a movement that might have been impatience or care. Lady Beatrice hesitated. Holmes pocketed the clue and rose to go. Holmes had allowed the faintest of smiles to linger as Lady Beatrice pressed her hand a shade too hastily upon the work-basket. When we returned with Sir Alistair to the hall, the smile had vanished, replaced by the thoughtful abstraction that to me was more alarming than any excitement. He requested the steward to have the footman bring in the morning's coal scuttle, not to replenish the grate, but to examine its contents. Blaine obeyed with a puzzled look, and Holmes at once thrust his hand among the lumps, drawing forth a shard of something that gleamed dull blue in the dim light. It was brittle, thin, and left a smear like candle grease upon his fingers. He held it beneath his nose, sniffed delicately, and nodded with the air of a man who finds a missing note in a chord. "As I thought," he murmured, before slipping the piece into his case. Sir Alistair hovered with a mixture of eagerness and unease. "Mr. Holmes, you have seen all I can show you. What do you make of it?" "What I make of it, Sir Alistair, is that someone in this household has devised a trick designed to appear supernatural while being of the simplest chemical contrivance. But the question, as ever, is not how, but why." Holmes's long gaze flicked upwards toward the stair where Lady Beatrice and her companion had retreated. "And to that end, I must see your steward's ledgers, the daily comings and goings, purchases and deliveries, particularly in this past fortnight." Blaine returned within minutes, carrying a stout book under his arm. Holmes set it upon the small oak table in the hall, and bent over it with his quick, darting eye. "Meat, candles, coal, bread, an order from a chemist in Cheapside, liniments, tonic powders. Do you recall this, Blaine?" The steward frowned. "Yes, sir. It was at Miss Armitage's request. She has long suffered headaches and asked that I procure her medicine." Holmes closed the book with a snap. "And you saw the medicine?" "No, sir. The parcel was delivered sealed." Holmes's expression was unreadable, but he thanked the steward and returned the ledger. "That will suffice. Dr. Watson, we have what we require here. The rest, I suspect, lies not in Cheyne Walk, but nearer to the Strand." When we emerged once more into the murk of the street, Sir Alistair looked at us with mingled hope and desperation. "You will not abandon me, Mr. Holmes. This matter, it touches my honour, my very household." Holmes laid a hand upon his arm with a rare gentleness. "Rest assured, Sir Alistair, we shall not abandon you. Return to your duties and let events proceed. I promise you, within 3 days, the author of this cold fire shall be laid bare." As we turned away, I could not resist my question. "Holmes, what possible purpose could such a trick serve? A ring in a grate, a blue glow, mere theatre, as you said." "Precisely, Watson. Theatre, and what is theatre but the art of persuading the eye against the reason? Mark me, this is no prank. It is intended to impress a particular mind with dread. When we know which mind, the rest follows." We took a cab towards Chancery Lane. Holmes leaned back, his gaze half closed, his long fingers pressed together. "The solicitor, Vernon. He is a pivot in this affair. If, as I suspect, the inscription in the ring is not random, then the law, through him, may hold the key." At Vernon's office, a small place with shelves groaning under dusty ledgers, we were shown into the man's presence. Archibald Vernon was lean, with eyes sharp as a rook's, and a manner that betrayed irritation at being interrupted. Holmes wasted no preamble. He produced the ring from his pocket and laid it on the desk. "Do you recognize this?" The solicitor took it up, turning it once in his fingers. For the barest instant I thought I saw a twitch of recognition pass his features, but he composed himself swiftly. "No, sir. A common band, though much damaged." "Why do you bring it to me?" "Because it bears an inscription of the year 1878, Holmes replied smoothly. And because you, as the family's solicitor, would surely know whether an Elizabeth to a Lachlan might mean aught in Sir Alistair's lineage. Vernon's lips pressed thin. The affairs of my client's family are not to be discussed with strangers. If Sir Alistair wishes me to disclose— "Spare us the formalities," Holmes cut in, his tone still mild. "Sir Alistair wishes nothing more than the truth. I would only observe that the handwriting of the inscription is unusual, too old-fashioned to belong to a jeweller of the 70s. It has more the look of a private hand, perhaps female. Does that suggest anything to you?" For the first time, Vernon's composure cracked. He set the ring down abruptly, his hand withdrawing, as though it burned him. "You must excuse me, I have an appointment." Holmes rose with a bow that was the very mask of courtesy. "We thank you for your time." And, without another word, he ushered me out into the street. The instant we were alone, he gave a short, dry laugh. "As I suspected, he knows the ring. More than that, he fears it." "Did you note the tremor of his hand, Watson? A lawyer trembles only when he sees ruin ahead." "And you think the ruin lies in this inscription?" "I think the ruin lies in the past. The ring belongs to a story Sir Alistair has not heard, or has chosen not to remember. We must unearth it, and swiftly, before the theatre of cold fire becomes a tragedy in earnest." We walked on in silence, the fog closing about us. Holmes's stride lengthened, his eyes gleamed with the keen hunger I had come to know so well. "Tonight, Watson, we return to the river. The Thames has given us the smell, the weed and the shard. It will give us the rest, if we know how to ask. Be ready, for I believe our adversary is watching every step we take." The fog that evening seemed denser still, as though the river itself had drawn a veil to hide what Holmes intended to discover. He had summoned me with his customary abruptness, thrusting into my hand a lantern whose glass panes were rubbed clear and whose wick burned low and steady. "No flaring light, Watson," he said as we descended the worn steps to the embankment. "Our quarry thrives in shadows and expects us to stumble blind. Let us disappoint him." We found a waterman willing, for a sovereign, to row us out into the midstream where the current ran strongest. The oars dipped with a rhythm that whispered rather than splashed, and the boat rocked gently, while Holmes leaned over the side, letting the lantern cast a faint glow upon the water's surface. The Thames gave back a shifting gleam, sluggish with refuse, yet alive in its way, and the stench was strong enough to sting the eyes. Holmes produced from his pocket a length of cord weighted with lead. He lowered it, hand over hand, until it struck something below with a hollow thud. "Mark that, Watson," he said. "There is no natural bed here. Something rests upon the bottom." With a sharp word to the waterman, he had the boat steadied while he drew the line upward. A bundle broke the surface, wrapped in sodden sacking bound by twine. The waterman muttered a curse and crossed himself, but Holmes seized the dripping parcel and laid it across the thwarts. His long fingers worked at the knots, and soon the sacking fell apart to reveal a mass of paper ruined by damp, with corners charred as if by fire. Among it lay a second object, a small casket, of tin, corroded green where the river had eaten at it. Holmes opened it, and within we saw what might once have been a letter sealed with wax. The seal was gone, the writing blurred to little more than smudges, but there remained enough to distinguish the letters E to L, written in the same old-fashioned hand as the ring's inscription. He bent close, his face intent. "So, the river has yielded its secret. Observe, Watson, the charred edges. This paper was meant to burn, yet for some reason it found its way here, in sacking weighted to the bottom. And what do we have to link it? A ring inscribed with the same hand, a glow, a smell, a household haunted not by spirits, but by memory. We rode back in silence, Holmes cradling the sodden bundle as though it were treasure. At Baker Street he spread the papers upon the table and applied the gentlest heat of the fire. Some disintegrated at once, but others, though blurred, bore traces of script. He passed me one fragment where the words betrayal and forgiven never could still be read. Another bore a date, March 1878. Holmes's lips tightened. A year before Sir Alistair's birth, Watson, a year in which the bonds of marriage or the promise of them were being tested. He drew from his case the blue shard we had found in the coal scuttle and laid it beside the fragments. Phosphorus compound, he muttered. Applied to paper or fabric, it gives our unearthly glow. Our adversary has contrived to reanimate a quarrel long buried, and to present it under the guise of supernatural warning. Why? That is the kernel. To what end should anyone wish Sir Alistair or his wife to tremble before shadows of the past? Before I could reply, a knock sounded at the door. Mrs. Hudson brought up a note, hand-delivered and addressed to Holmes. He slit it open, read, and tossed it to me. The hand was fine, feminine, and unsigned. It contained only these words: "If you value your life, meddle no more in the affair of the ring. The fire burns cold, but death burns hot." I looked up to see Holmes smiling in that dangerous way of his when the game was at last revealing its stakes. Now we are certain, Watson. The adversary has declared himself or herself. Only one in that household could know we retrieved the ring. Only one could send such a note before the police themselves were even aware of our investigation. But which? I asked. The steward, the companion, the wife? Patience, said Holmes. We must let them weave the web tighter. Tomorrow we shall return to Cheyne Walk with Scotland Yard in tow. Lestrade shall have his ghostly fire, and we shall see whose hand trembles when the flame is kindled. The following morning we arrived with Lestrade, who looked none too pleased to be drawn into a business he deemed theatrical. Yet at Holmes's request he inspected the grate and declared himself satisfied there was no trick. Holmes then produced one of the paper fragments smeared faintly with the phosphorus he had detected and set it near the bars. At once the pale blue glow sprang up, steady and unnatural, casting an eerie pallor over the room. Sir Alistair recoiled, Lady Beatrice gasped, and Miss Armitage let out a cry before she mastered herself. Holmes did not so much as glance at them. He observed only the glow, then turned abruptly. "You see, Inspector, it is not spirit but science, and science, as always, leaves traces. One hand in this household procured the phosphorus, prepared the paper, and placed the ring. That hand belongs to the author of the deception. The question remains, whose hand was it?" Miss Armitage's face was pale, Lady Beatrice's composed but strained, and Blaine, the steward, stood with jaw set, his eyes unreadable. Holmes's gaze lingered upon each in turn, but he offered no conclusion. Instead he folded the glowing scrap in his tongs, dropped it into a jar of water, and extinguished it with a hiss. "Enough for today," he said. "We know how the ghost walks. Soon we shall know why." As we left the house, Lestrade grumbled that Holmes had dragged him on a fool's errand, but I could see the satisfaction burning in my friend's eyes. He was not yet ready to name the culprit, but the net had tightened. The cold fire was no longer a riddle of chemistry alone. It was the mask for a human motive. And Holmes, with that infallible instinct of his, was already setting his mind upon the heart that beat behind the masquerade. Holmes remained silent for the length of our cab ride back to Baker Street. His head rested against the cushions, eyes half closed, fingers tapping against one another in that nervous music I knew meant his mind was working furiously. I refrained from interrupting, though the puzzle gnawed at me. At last, when the wheels ground to a halt outside our door, he stirred and gave a short laugh. "Watson, there is a hand in this matter that thinks itself subtle. Yet it has left its signature as plainly as a schoolboy scrawls his name upon a wall." Once inside, he set about drying the sodden letters we had recovered from the river. He worked with the precision of a surgeon, laying each fragment between blotting papers and weighting them with volumes pulled from his shelves. I busied myself with the fire until he beckoned me over. "Observe, Watson, here, where the ink has blurred, the hand yet reveals itself. A certain curl upon the R, a downward slant on the F. You will recall that note we received last evening, warning us from the case. Compare the strokes." I examined the fragments with care. To my unpractised eye, the resemblance was faint, yet undeniable, once pointed out. "You mean to say the same hand that penned the letter cast into the river has now threatened you?" "Precisely. And what does that tell us? That the adversary has not merely uncovered some relic of the past, but has access to it, has handled it recently to prepare this display. Now ask yourself, which member of Sir Alister's household could command such access?" "Surely not Lady Beatrice herself," I said. Her composure was strained, but she seemed as startled as any. Holmes gave me a sidelong glance. "Startled, yes, but whether at the apparition or at its failure to remain secret, we cannot yet say. As for Miss Armitage, she betrayed a sharp cry, out of all proportion to the trick revealed. Blaine, the steward, alone kept his mask intact, yet he alone controls the ordering of supplies, and might have procured phosphorus without suspicion. 3 hands, Watson, and each possible, yet one truth: the motive is not mere mischief, it is coercion." I pressed him to explain, but he waved me off with a curt gesture. "Too soon, too soon. We require one more card to fall, and I propose to hasten its fall." He drew a telegraph form towards him and scribbled a message with brisk certainty. "There. That should bring our reluctant solicitor running. I have asked him to attend us here tomorrow with all papers relating to the MacLeod estate. A bold request, but a guilty man will dare not refuse." The following day, punctual as a metronome, Archibald Vernon arrived at Baker Street with a bundle under his arm. He looked pale, as if sleep had fled him. Holmes received him with politeness, offered him a chair, and without ceremony drew from his desk the ring, the sodden fragments, and the threatening note. Vernon's eyes flicked from one to the other, and in that flicker I saw the truth of Holmes's suspicion. "You will oblige me, Mr. Vernon," Holmes said smoothly, "by explaining how these relics intended for the bottom of the Thames came to be rescued, preserved, and used as instruments in a parlour trick of phosphorescence." The solicitor's hand shook as he adjusted his cuff. I cannot imagine. You must not suppose that I suppose nothing," Holmes cut in. I observe that you recognize both the ring and the hand which inscribed it. The date, 1878. Was there not some scandal then, some matter buried by the family, to preserve its name?" Vernon hesitated, and then, in a low tone, admitted, "There was. Sir Lachlan MacLeod, the present baronet's father, had been engaged to a certain lady, Elizabeth Cameron, before marrying his present widow. A quarrel arose, its nature I never learned, but she vanished from society, and soon after he married another. The letters between them were believed destroyed. If any survived, they were locked away. How they came to light now I cannot conceive." Holmes leaned forward. "Yet someone conceived it, someone in the house close enough to discover and employ them. Consider, Mr. Vernon, who had access to your strong-boxes, to the family records, or to the attics where forgotten things are stored?" The man's lips thinned. "The steward, Blaine, has often been charged with clearing old trunks and papers. Miss Armitage, too, has wandered the house freely. And Lady Beatrice, as mistress, commands all." Holmes dismissed him soon after, having gained what he needed. When Vernon had gone, he turned to me with eyes alight. "It fits, Watson. A past engagement, a ring, letters preserved against the tide of years. Someone has dredged them forth to suggest that Sir Alistair's parentage, his very legitimacy, may rest upon doubtful ground. What more potent weapon against a proud man, yet who profits? That is our next quarry." That night, Holmes refused to sleep. He paced the rug, pipe smoke curling round him, while I dozed in my chair. Toward the small hours he halted abruptly. "Enough waiting. We must provoke the culprit into a final act. Tomorrow we tell Sir Alistair openly that we possess the ring, the letters, and the means of the trick. We shall watch his household, Watson, as a falcon watches a rabbit hole. The guilty hand will be forced to strike again, and when it does, we shall seize it." True to his word, we visited Cheyne Walk on the morrow. Sir Alistair listened with incredulity as Holmes displayed the relics and declared that the deception was the work of one under his own roof. Lady Beatrice paled, Miss Armitage dropped her embroidery in her agitation, and Blaine merely folded his arms. Holmes spoke deliberately, each word meant to sink like lead. "These proofs I hold secure. The matter may be hushed, provided the author confesses. Failing that, another manifestation may be attempted. If so, we shall be ready." That evening, Holmes and I concealed ourselves in the drawing-room, the grate cold and swept, the lantern shuttered. The house lay still, only the occasional creak of timbers and the far-off roll of the river breaking the silence. Holmes's eyes gleamed in the darkness. "Now, Watson, patience. The moth circles the flame, but tonight it shall find the flame burns too bright." The hours dragged in that dim chamber with the weight of lead. Holmes had chosen a position behind the tall drapery, near the window, where the fog pressing against the panes served as a natural cloak. I crouched by the pianoforte, revolver in hand, though he had counselled me to fire only if the gravest necessity demanded it. The grate, swept and barren of cinders, gaped like a mouth stripped of teeth. In the silence, every creak of the old house seemed magnified, the distant drip of water in some forgotten cistern, the shifting of beams as the night air settled, the faint stirrings of a restless servant overhead. It was near midnight when a sound distinct from the house's usual murmurs reached us, the stealthy pressure of a key turned in a lock. A soft scrape followed as the door opened. A shaded lamp entered first, its glow screened to a narrow slit. Behind it crept a figure. The lamplight revealed the outline of a woman, slight, deliberate in her movements, her head turning anxiously from side to side. She carried under one arm a parcel, which she unwrapped upon the hearthrug. I saw her hands tremble as she drew forth several sheets of paper and a small vial, uncorking it with effort. The sharp, unmistakable odour of phosphorus bit into the air. Holmes stirred at my side with the quiet satisfaction of a hunter whose patience has been justified. The woman laid the papers in the grate, sprinkled them with the contents of the vial, and bent low to adjust them as though arranging flowers in a vase. As the substance caught the faint draught, the first shimmer of blue light began to creep across the paper's surface, ghostly and unnatural. She gave a small gasp of triumph, as if the fire itself had answered her command. In that moment Holmes stepped forward, and his voice rang out cold and incisive. "A most striking effect, Miss Armitage, but unfortunately for you the audience tonight is not Sir Alistair and Lady Beatrice, it is Scotland Yard." The young woman recoiled, the lamp tumbling from her grasp to roll upon the rug. I sprang to catch it before flame could catch, and by the time I had set it safely upright, Holmes had already seized the culprit's wrist in a grip from which she could not escape. Her face, pale in the wavering light, revealed both fear and defiance. "You have been clever," Holmes said, "to exploit the relics of an old passion long concealed, and to cloak them in chemical mystery. Yet you have been reckless in equal measure. The handwriting upon the river letters and upon the warning note is your own. The ribbon we found beneath the pianoforte cover was of your work basket, and just now you have supplied us with the last proof." Her lips parted as though to protest, but Holmes silenced her with a gesture. "Spare us invention. The motive alone remains to be heard, and for that Inspector Lestrade shall be present." He whistled softly, and within moments the door opened to admit Lestrade and Sir Alistair, both summoned beforehand by Holmes's instructions. The baronet's face was grim with suppressed fury. The inspector, though weary, looked sharply pleased to see his quarry caught red-handed. Miss Armitage faltered as Sir Alistair confronted her. "Why?" he demanded hoarsely. "Why bring this shame upon my house? What devil prompted you to such wickedness?" She straightened then with a pride that lent her a tragic dignity. "The devil of truth, Sir Alistair. You live in honour upon a name that was stolen. Your father pledged himself to my aunt, Elizabeth Cameron, and cast her aside. That ring, those letters, she gave them to him, and he betrayed her. She withered in obscurity, and the stain was buried with her. I found the letters among trunks long neglected, hidden away as though she were never born. I would not see the MacLeod name pass untarnished. I would have your wife believe her house cursed, your nights haunted, until you yourself trembled before the sin of your father." Her words fell like stones into silence. Sir Alistair's face worked with conflicting emotions, anger, disbelief, and the dull pain of a man struck by truths too old to contest. At last he spoke, low and uneven. "If what you say is true, then it is not my sin but his. Yet you sought to punish me, and through me, my wife. You would have her believe I deceived her. That I cannot forgive." Lestrade stepped forward briskly. "That's enough. The law has little patience for melodrama, miss. You'll answer for attempted fraud and whatever else Mr. Holmes can heap upon the charge sheet." Holmes released her wrist and allowed the inspector to take her into custody, though he regarded her with something that was neither pity nor disdain, but a cool recognition of a worthy opponent, bested. "Your aunt's wrong was real," he said softly, "but you chose the path of deceit to right it. In that you merely added another shadow to the name you wished to blacken." As Lestrade led her away, Holmes turned to Sir Alistair, who stood rigid by the grate. "You see, Sir Alistair, the cold fire was never more than phosphorus upon paper, and the ring but a trinket wielded with malicious intent. The true flame was resentment, kept alive through the years until it burned too brightly to be concealed. Your household is safe from ghosts, but not from memory, and memory, alas, is the one adversary even I cannot lay by the heels." We left Cheyne Walk in the small hours, the fog lifting faintly, as though the river itself sighed with relief. In the cab, Holmes leaned back, his eyes closed once more, his features relaxed now that the chase was done. "Watson," he murmured, "you observed tonight how vengeance cloaks itself in theatre. It is always so. The world believes in apparitions. I believe in men and women, with their jealousies, ambitions, and griefs. There lies the true mystery of life and the true crime." I glanced at him, marvelling as always at the strange blend of ice and fire that made up my friend's soul. He gave no further word, but in the silence of the rattling wheels, I found myself reflecting that Holmes, too, was haunted not by cold fire, but by the ceaseless pursuit of truth which burned in him with a flame no adversary could extinguish. The following morning dawned clear, though the air held that raw dampness peculiar to London after a heavy fog. I found Holmes already awake and at his desk, the remains of an untasted breakfast tray beside him, his pen scratching across a sheet of foolscap. He looked up as I entered, his eyes alight with a vigour that belied the late hour of our return from Cheyne Walk. "Ah, Watson, you are just in time," he said. "I am composing my notes for Lestrade, lest he blunder in presenting the case at court. The law, you see, demands facts, not deductions, and though the former must ever rest upon the latter, one must dress the reasoning in such garments that the bench and jury will not mistake it for fancy." I settled into my chair opposite, still digesting the tumult of the previous night. "Do you anticipate Miss Armitage will persist in her tale of family vengeance?" She spoke with conviction, Holmes. There was bitterness in her every word. Holmes tapped the pen against his lip. "Conviction, yes, but conviction does not equal truth entire. She gave us the framework of her motive, but left us with certain loose ends. Consider, Watson, if her object was to shame Sir Alistair with revelations of his father's past, why resort to tricks of phosphorescence and ghostly apparitions? A simple letter delivered with the relics would have sufficed. The very theatricality of her scheme suggests another purpose." "You mean she deceived even in her confession?" Holmes allowed himself a thin smile. "I mean that truth is rarely so convenient as to fall whole into one's lap. Her words contained fact, certainly, but also concealment. We must discover what she omitted." Before I could respond, a knock at the door interrupted us. Mrs. Hudson ushered in Sir Alistair himself, his face pale with exhaustion, yet his bearing stiff with pride. He declined refreshment and seated himself with a sigh that spoke of a night spent in wrestling with demons invisible. "Mr. Holmes," he began, "I am deeply grateful that you have unmasked the trick played upon my household, yet I cannot rest easy. What Miss Armitage said, her charges against my late father, if they hold any substance, then my name itself is tainted. I must know the full truth, even if it shames me." Holmes regarded him steadily. "It is the burden of every son, Sir Alistair, to inherit not only the honours but the shadows of his father. Whether the shadows prove more than memory is another matter. Permit me, then, to ask, have you knowledge of Elizabeth Cameron beyond the whispers Miss Armitage revealed?" Sir Alistair shook his head. "Only that she was once spoken of as a beauty of her circle, then vanished suddenly from society. My father never named her. If there were letters, they were kept from me." Holmes leaned forward, his voice taking on that quiet intensity which always commanded attention. "And yet the ring and letters existed, preserved in secret, only to be dredged forth now. Someone, Sir Alistair, not only found them, but contrived to use them. The question remains, did Miss Armitage act alone, or was she guided, perhaps even manipulated by another hand?" The baronet's eyes widened. "You mean there may be a deeper conspiracy?" "I mean," Holmes replied gravely, "that we cannot assume the story ends with her arrest. If she had access to the relics, how did they find their way to the bottom of the Thames? If she truly wished to use them, why consign them to the river only to retrieve them again? There is a contradiction, and contradiction is the one thing that cannot exist in truth." Sir Alistair passed a hand across his brow. "Then I beg you, pursue the matter to its end. My peace demands it." When he had gone, Holmes resumed his pacing, his hands clasped behind his back. "Watson, do you see the floor? Those letters, weighted and cast into the river, were not the work of Miss Armitage. She found them, yes, but someone else sought to dispose of them. Someone who feared their discovery, who wished them hidden beyond recall. And that someone, I said slowly, must have been in the household as well. Precisely, which narrows our circle once more to Lady Beatrice and Blaine. He halted, his gaze fixed upon the smoke rising from his pipe. Lady Beatrice, who showed agitation at the mention of a blue ribbon. Blaine, who has the keys to every trunk and box, the freedom of the house, and the discipline to keep his face unreadable. One of these two, Watson, consigned the relics to the Thames. One of these two has yet to be unmasked. The remainder of the day was consumed in Holmes's inquiries, though he confided little to me of their nature. He departed shortly after luncheon, returning only after dusk with his coat damp from the mist and his eyes glittering with triumph. He threw upon the table a slip of paper bearing an address in Whitechapel. There, Watson, lies the final thread, a chemist's shop whose ledger records the purchase of phosphorus paste 2 weeks past. The buyer gave no name, but described himself as steward to a gentleman's house in Chelsea, Blaine, of course. "Then the case is complete," I exclaimed. "Not quite. We must still prove that he, not Miss Armitage, orchestrated the apparition, yet I fancy he has already betrayed himself. Tonight we return to Cheyne Walk. We shall confront Blaine with the evidence, and if my reasoning holds, the last mask will fall." That evening found us once more in the shadowed hall of the MacLeod residence. Sir Alistair received us anxiously, Lady Beatrice pale but composed. Blaine entered at Holmes's summons, his bearing as stiff as ever. Holmes wasted no time in pleasantries. He laid upon the table the slip of paper, the fragments of letters, and the vial recovered from Miss Armitage. "Your purchases betray you, Mr. Blaine," Holmes said crisply. "The phosphorus was yours. You supplied it, and with it the means of trickery. Miss Armitage played her part, but you—" Holmes's words were cut short by a sudden movement. Blaine's hand darted to his breast, where something gleamed in the lamplight. Instinctively I half rose, my revolver ready, but Holmes was swifter still. With a single bound he had seized the steward's wrist, wrenching free a small dagger. It clattered to the floor as Blaine staggered back, his mask of composure at last shattered. "You see, Watson," Holmes said, holding the man fast, "the true author has revealed himself. The fire may burn cold, but his guilt burns hot indeed." Blaine's composure, so long maintained, crumbled in an instant beneath Holmes's unyielding grip. The man's jaw clenched, his eyes darted toward the door, as though measuring the chance of escape, and a bead of sweat rolled slowly from his temple, despite the coolness of the room. Sir Alistair, standing rigid by the mantel, looked upon the scene with a mixture of astonishment and disbelief, while Lady Beatrice gave a faint cry and pressed her handkerchief to her lips. Holmes, calm as ever, twisted the steward's wrist until the dagger lay harmless upon the carpet. "It is a dangerous game, Mr. Blaine," he said evenly, "to attempt concealment behind a veil of loyalty. You have played your part with great discipline, yet the smallest slip has betrayed you. The chemist's ledger, the chemical traces, and now this attempt at violence. Each points to you as surely as if your name were etched upon the ring itself." Blaine's lips parted, but no words emerged. He swallowed hard, and when his voice came, it was hoarse with the effort of control. "You mistake me, sir. I sought only to protect the family name, to keep buried what should never have been unearthed. If that is guilt, then I do not deny it." Holmes's eyes gleamed with cold interest. "Ah, then you admit it. You cast the letters into the Thames, hoping the river would consume them. Yet Miss Armitage, chance or design, retrieved them, and you, seeing her intent to use them, joined your skill to her zeal, providing the phosphorus to lend her performance an air of sorcery. Am I correct?" Blaine winced, his silence confirmation enough. Sir Alistair's voice broke in, harsh with indignation. "Blaine, you of all men, you whom I trusted as my father trusted before me, to conspire with that woman against my house, what devilry possessed you?" The steward raised his head with sudden fierceness. "Devilry? No, Sir Alistair. Duty. I served your father until his dying day. I knew of his pledge to Elizabeth Cameron, and I knew how cruelly he wronged her. When she vanished, I alone kept her letters, her ring, meaning to destroy them, but never finding the courage. Years passed. When Miss Armitage discovered them, she would have ruined you outright. I sought only to control her, to turn her fury into theatre rather than scandal. If I failed, it was because she was headstrong, and you, sir, are proud. But never say I betrayed the MacLeods. I tried to shield you, though the past would not stay buried." Lady Beatrice lowered her handkerchief, her face pale as ivory. "You mean everything she said was true?" "Sir Lachlan betrayed his promise?" Holmes interposed before Sir Alistair could answer. "Truth, Lady Beatrice, is rarely pure. Sir Lachlan may indeed have pledged himself, yet engagements broken are not crimes in law, only in sentiment. Miss Cameron's suffering was real, but the guilt was his, not his son's. Blaine, however, by conspiring to raise spectres from ashes, has turned old sorrow into present crime." Lestrade, who had observed in silence until now, stepped forward with his habitual brusqueness. "That's enough for me. The charge is clear: fraud, conspiracy, and attempted assault. Blaine, you'll come with me." The steward straightened, his face set in grim resignation. "So be it. I have borne the MacLeod secrets longer than any living soul. Perhaps it is fitting that I pay the price now." He allowed Lestrade to take his arm without resistance, though as he passed Sir Alistair, he paused. "Forgive me, sir. I thought to spare you." Sir Alistair turned away, his shoulders taut. The sound of the door closing behind Blaine seemed to release a pressure within the room. Lady Beatrice sank into a chair, her hands trembling. "Alistair, this shadow, it will cling to us. How can we hold our heads in society, knowing what has been said?" Her husband crossed swiftly to her side. "It is not we who are guilty, Beatrice. My father's actions cannot condemn us. We shall stand together, and the world shall see our honour is unshaken." Holmes, watching them with a rare softness in his expression, inclined his head. "That is wisely said, Sir Alistair. Reputation is but the echo of deeds past, yet character is the voice of the present. Let the echo fade. What remains is yours to shape." He gathered the relics, the ring, the charred fragments, the vial, and placed them carefully back into his leather case. "These, I think, must never return to Cheyne Walk. Better they rest in Scotland Yard's files, forgotten among dust and docket." Lestrade grunted assent, then took his leave with his prisoner. When we two prepared to depart, Sir Alistair grasped Holmes's hand with unexpected fervour. "You have given me back my peace, Mr. Holmes, and more. You have preserved my wife's faith in me. That is a debt I cannot repay." Holmes merely smiled faintly. "Pay it, Sir Alistair, by living more securely in the present than in the shadows of the past. That is the only currency that matters." Outside, the night air was sharp, the fog burned away by a clear moon. We walked in silence for some minutes, our steps echoing along the deserted pavement. At last I spoke. "So it was Blaine all along, after all our doubts. Yet you seemed for a moment to suspect even Lady Beatrice." Holmes gave a low chuckle. "My dear Watson, suspicion is but the lamp by which we search. It must be turned upon all corners lest some truth escape. Lady Beatrice was never more than a possibility, but Blaine's discipline, his soldier's silence, that betrayed him more surely than words. Only a man who carries too heavy a burden of knowledge can stand so rigid." Once the chemist's ledger confirmed my surmise, the rest followed. I shook my head. And Miss Armitage? Do you believe her motive was, as she claimed, vengeance for her aunt? Holmes's gaze grew distant. In part, yes. But there was also vanity, Watson. She delighted in the artistry of the deception, in making others tremble. Had she acted alone, she might still have failed, but with Blaine's help, she dared more. She will answer for her share before the court, but her punishment lies chiefly in the futility of her scheme. For vengeance, once played as theatre, loses its sting. We reached Baker Street at last, the familiar lamps glowing warm against the night. Holmes paused on the step, drawing a long breath as though releasing the final vestiges of the case. It is done, Watson. Cold fire has been quenched. Yet mark how easily men kindle false flames when truth itself is too hard to bear. That, I fear, is the eternal mystery. And with that he entered, leaving me to marvel once more at the mind that could see through fog, flame, and deceit, and bring into the clear air the stark, unvarnished truth. The morning after Blaine's arrest dawned grey and drizzling, the sort of London day that blurred chimney pots into shadows and left the cobbles slick beneath the hansom wheels. I found Holmes in his chair, slippered feet upon the fender, pipe neglected upon the hearth, his gaze fixed on the drifting smoke, as if the curling tendrils might spell out answers he alone could read. The air of finality that had hung upon him the previous night was gone. Instead, there was restlessness, a tension in his long fingers, a narrowing of the eyes that told me the matter, in his view, had not yet reached its true conclusion. "You are dissatisfied," I remarked, settling opposite him. "Yet surely we have reached the end. Blaine confessed enough, and Miss Armitage's motives are clear. The court will have little difficulty assigning guilt." Holmes turned his head slowly, and the flicker of a smile crossed his lips, though it carried no warmth. "My dear Watson, you persist in confusing the resolution of a case with the cessation of its echoes. Blaine's words were those of a man cornered. They fit the facts sufficiently to content Lestrade, but they leave me unsatisfied. There is a dissonance, a single note out of key, which yet vibrates in my mind. Until it is silenced, I cannot rest." I pressed him to explain, but he rose abruptly and began to pace, his dressing gown trailing like the robe of some lean ascetic. "Consider, Watson. Blaine claimed he kept Elizabeth Cameron's letters through loyalty, intending one day to destroy them, and when Miss Armitage discovered them, he sought to channel her anger into artifice rather than open scandal. Yet why, if he truly wished to protect the MacLeod name, did he supply the very means by which the deception gained power? Why risk discovery with phosphorus, with theatrics certain to attract suspicion, rather than suppress the matter altogether? No, there is something deeper. Blaine is guilty, but perhaps not guilty of all." Before I could frame an objection, a knock sounded at the door. Mrs. Hudson entered with a telegram, damp from the rain. Holmes tore it open and scanned the contents. His face sharpened as if struck by a sudden draught of icy air. Without a word, he tossed it to me. It bore the signature of Lestrade and was brief. "Prisoner attempted escape during transfer. Blaine wounded guard with concealed blade, fled into night. Scotland Yard in pursuit." I looked up in alarm, but Holmes only sighed, as though confirmation of his unease had arrived. "There, Watson. Does that look like the action of a man resigned to inevitable punishment? It speaks of desperation, yes, but also of a secret, yet unexposed. Blaine flees not from the law alone, but from something more personal, the dread of what further revelations might follow." Within the hour, we were in a cab bound once more for Cheyne Walk. Sir Alistair received us with evident fatigue, yet his manner was cordial. Lady Beatrice sat nearby, her embroidery untouched in her lap, her face drawn with sleeplessness. Holmes wasted no time with courtesies. "Sir Alistair, your steward has escaped custody. It is essential we know all there is to know about your father's connection with Elizabeth Cameron. Hold nothing back, for silence may yet endanger you." The baronet stiffened, but under Holmes's unwavering gaze he relented. "There is little I can add. I was a child when she vanished. My mother never spoke her name, and my father, though stern, was no confessor. Only once, when I was 15, did I overhear 2 retainers whispering that she had died abroad in disgrace. Whether true, I cannot say." Lady Beatrice looked up then, her voice tremulous yet firm. "My husband has concealed from you one fact, Mr. Holmes, not from disloyalty, but from pain. Last winter, in arranging some neglected chambers of this house, I came upon a miniature, a portrait of a young woman, dark-haired, with eyes strangely like those of Miss Armitage. On the back was written Elizabeth, 1877. I placed it away, saying nothing, for I feared to wound him. Yet when the ring and letters appeared, I knew it must be the same." Holmes bent forward with sudden intensity. "And where is this miniature now?" "In my jewel box," she whispered. "It has never left my possession since." Holmes requested it at once, and when she produced the small oval case, he opened it under the lamplight. The likeness, though delicate, bore indeed a striking resemblance to Miss Armitage, as if the aunt had bequeathed her very features to the niece. Holmes examined the brush-strokes, the varnish, even the clasp. At length he muttered, "So, the hand of the past reaches into the present, and blood speaks to blood. It was not Blaine who first preserved these relics. He was custodian, perhaps even unwilling. But another, perhaps the lady herself, left them where they might one day be found. Miss Armitage's fury, Blaine's complicity, these are but consequences. The original cause lies deeper, Watson, and I fear it is not yet done with us." Sir Alistair, agitated, demanded what Holmes implied, but my friend only shook his head. "Too soon to say. Until Blaine is recaptured, we move in twilight. Yet mark me, he will return to Cheyne Walk. His course is not flight into obscurity, but a circle back to the very hearth he sought to guard. For men bound by secrets cannot break their chains. They are drawn again and again to the source." That evening we lingered in the house, Holmes insisting upon remaining while the family retired. The rain beat steadily upon the windows, the fire crackled low, and the hours stretched long. Holmes sat motionless, listening, with an intentness that made the silence oppressive. Near midnight a faint sound came, no louder than a rat stirring in the wainscot, yet Holmes's hand rose instantly to caution me. From the passage beyond came the soft creak of a board, then the stealthy turning of the latch. The door opened, and into the dim room stepped Blaine himself. His clothes wet and torn, his face gaunt with exhaustion, yet his eyes burning with desperate resolve. He moved at once to the mantel, as though seeking something hidden there. In a flash, Holmes had risen, barring his way. "So you return, as I knew you must," Holmes said quietly. "But what is it you seek, Blaine? The miniature, the letters, or the peace you can never regain?" The steward's hand trembled toward his coat, but Holmes was faster. With a single motion he seized his arm, and the struggle that followed was short, for Blaine's strength was spent. He collapsed into the nearest chair, his breath ragged. "You do not understand," he gasped. "It was not vengeance alone. There is more, much more, and if I do not tell it, others will. The truth cannot be drowned, not even in the Thames." Holmes's eyes gleamed with fierce satisfaction. "Then speak, Blaine. Speak now, and let us at last see the full shape of this shadow." Blaine sat hunched in the chair, the rain dripping steadily from his sleeves onto the carpet, his chest heaving as though each breath were wrested from a struggle greater than the law's pursuit. Holmes stood over him, one hand upon the mantel, the other resting lightly on the arm of the chair, his gaze fixed with that hawk-like intensity which allowed no evasion. I, for my part, held my revolver loosely in readiness, though something in Blaine's broken figure told me he had not come to fight, but to unburden. "It began," he said at last, his voice little more than a rasp, "long before Sir Alister's birth, long before Lady Beatrice drew breath. Your father, Sir Alister, pledged himself to Elizabeth Cameron, pledged before witnesses, though no priest had yet blessed the vow. They were young, and he was reckless, but she believed him with her whole heart. When he cast her aside for wealth and title, it broke her. She bore him a child, a daughter conceived in that false engagement. To protect her name she fled, and I alone knew. I was sent to arrange her exile, and I did as he bade me. But she would not release me from her confidence. She left her letters with me and the ring he had given her, charging me to keep them safe against the day truth might be demanded. Sir Alister, who had remained by the hearth, gave a strangled exclamation. "A daughter? Then Miss Armitage—" Blaine's head bowed. Her mother was that child. She never knew her father's name, save that her mother whispered it with bitterness on her deathbed. "Miss Lily Armitage is your cousin, Sir Alister. The blood of MacLeod runs in her veins as surely as in yours." A silence fell heavy as the rain beyond the windows. Lady Beatrice's embroidery slipped unheeded from her lap, and even Holmes, master of composure, drew in a breath sharper than usual. "So," he murmured. The ring was not a token alone, but the symbol of a bond broken, and the letters the testament of that betrayal. Miss Armitage's fury was not only for her aunt, but for her own bloodline denied. That explains her passion, her vehemence, her desperate cry when the cold fire was unmasked. She was not merely avenging the past, she was asserting her right to be acknowledged. Sir Alister's face was ashen. "Why did you not tell me, Blaine? Why keep me blind all these years? Had I known, I might have met her as kin, not as foe. You forced this tragedy upon us." Blaine lifted his eyes, and for the first time I saw not hardness, but despair. "Because your father bound me by oath, he feared the revelation would undo the inheritance, cast doubt upon your legitimacy. He made me swear silence, and I, who owed him my place and my life, obeyed. Even after his death I could not bring myself to break faith, though I loathed the burden. When Miss Armitage came to me with the letters demanding justice, I thought to manage her anger by clothing it in spectacle. A trick of science, I told myself, would vent her bitterness without laying the naked truth before you. But the truth, as I said, will not be drowned. It rose again, as it was bound to do. Holmes's hand tightened slightly upon the chair. "And so you returned tonight, not for escape, but to ensure the relics could not be twisted further. You sought the miniature, perhaps the last token, binding the chain." Blaine nodded wearily. "I could not let them pass into other hands. Once the law takes them, the scandal becomes public, the MacLeod name dragged through mud. I thought, foolishly, that if I destroyed them now, I might still protect what remains." Holmes straightened, the light of deduction clear in his eyes. "But by withholding the truth, you ensured its revelation would come in the worst possible fashion. You may plead loyalty, Blaine, but it is loyalty corrupted by fear. Miss Armitage's vengeance was misguided, yet understandable. Yours was cowardice masquerading as fidelity." At this, Sir Alister stepped forward, his voice shaking. Enough, Holmes. He has confessed more than I could bear. If she is truly of my blood, then she shall be treated as such, though her actions have been grievous. The law must have its due, but I will not let her think herself abandoned as her grandmother was. I will see she is provided for, that she suffers no destitution. The stain lies with my father, not with her." Lady Beatrice reached for her husband's hand, her eyes glistening. "You are right, Alistair. Mercy is the only answer to such sorrow." Holmes looked at them both, his face unreadable for a moment, then softened almost imperceptibly. "You speak wisely. Let the law judge Blaine for his deception, but let compassion temper your dealings with Miss Armitage. Truth has a way of wounding less deeply when it is met with generosity rather than denial." Lestrade, who had been summoned back hastily and now stood at the threshold with 2 constables, broke in impatiently. "This is all very touching, but my concern is the charges. Blaine, you'll come with us. The court will decide how much mercy is to be spared." Blaine rose slowly, as though the weight of years pressed upon his shoulders, and allowed the constables to take him. As he passed Sir Alistair, he paused and whispered, "I did wrong by silence, sir. Whatever befalls me now, know that I sought, in my way, to shield you." Then he was gone, his footsteps fading down the corridor. Holmes closed his case and turned to me with that air of finality I had come to recognize as the true end of a matter. "There, Watson, is the full circle. A promise broken in youth has echoed through 2 generations, leaving sorrow and bitterness in its wake. The ring in the cold fire was never magic, but it burned all the same, with memory, with betrayal, with blood denied. Such flames, my dear fellow, scorch deeper than any chemical trick." Later, as we rode back through the rain-slick streets, Holmes sat silent, his eyes fixed upon the blurred lamps beyond the cab window. At last he spoke, more to himself than to me. "Strange is it not how the sins of fathers visit themselves upon the sons, and the silence of one man may prove more ruinous than the speech of another." Blaine chose silence, and in the end it condemned him. Had he spoken sooner, there would have been no cold fire, no theatre of vengeance, no shame to endure. But men will ever believe that concealment preserves honour, when it is truth alone that can cleanse it. I could not but agree, and as the cab rattled on toward Baker Street, I reflected that this case had shown me more of Holmes's philosophy than any he had yet revealed, that justice is not only in the catching of culprits, but in the unmasking of human weakness, so that mercy may temper judgment where guilt alone cannot. The case, though outwardly concluded, lingered with me in the days that followed. Miss Armitage, though remanded in custody, received from Sir Alistair's hand a letter of solemn promise that she would not be abandoned, but acknowledged as kin and supported whatever sentence the court might impose. Blaine, for his part, faced the law with stoic acceptance. He had carried a burden too long, and in its weight had warped both duty and honour. It seemed almost a release to him when the chains of secrecy were at last struck away, even if the irons of justice replaced them. In Baker Street, life resumed its familiar rhythm, though I sensed in Holmes a shade of introspection that was not always present after a solved mystery. He had brought the matter to light with his customary brilliance, yet there was something in the sorrowful tangle of blood, loyalty, and betrayal that touched him in a rare way. He made no jests at Lestrade's expense, nor did he deliver his usual ironic commentary upon the law's blindness. Instead, he allowed the silence of our rooms to speak, punctuated only by the scratch of his bow upon the violin in the late evenings, when the melancholy strains seemed to echo the unquiet past of Cheyne Walk. One evening, as we sat together, I ventured to speak what had long pressed upon my mind. Holmes, you unravelled every thread, the ring, the fire, the letters, even the hidden kinship. Yet I cannot help but wonder, do you feel satisfaction or only weariness when the truth proves so painful to those who must bear it? He set down his bow and looked at me with that keen, almost pitying expression he reserved for my earnestness. My dear Watson, satisfaction lies not in the comfort of the truth, but in its inevitability. Better a wound cut cleanly than a rot festering in the dark. The MacLeods will bear their shame, yes, but they will also be free of illusions. That, in the end, is the only gift reason can give to the heart. He rose then, drew the curtains against the night, and spoke with a faint smile. Besides, it is not for us to dwell upon one case when the world teems with others. Even now the bell of the yard may ring with some fresh absurdity demanding explanation. The river will continue to carry its secrets, Watson, but so long as there is a mind to read them and a pen to record them, we shall have no lack of occupation. And so it was that the ring found in cold fire passed into memory, another chapter in the long catalogue of Holmes's triumphs. Yet I have never forgotten the look upon Miss Armitage's face when the truth was spoken, nor the tremor in Sir Alister's voice as he claimed her as family despite all. Cases may end with the clink of handcuffs, but the echoes of the human heart remain long after the criminal is unmasked. Holmes himself, when pressed by admirers in later years to name his most curious investigations, would never cite this one. He disdained its theatrics, its blue glow, its stage play of ghosts. Yet I know, from the sombre chords he drew from his violin in the quiet nights thereafter, that he remembered it as one of those rare puzzles in which the solution was not triumph alone, but also tragedy. For my own part, I can only say that I left the matter with a deeper respect for the strange ways in which family, honour, and secrecy weave their webs across generations. The fire that glowed without heat had vanished, quenched forever, yet in its cold light we had glimpsed how easily men and women may deceive themselves in the name of pride, loyalty, or revenge. And so I close this record content that once more Sherlock Holmes had cast the light of reason into the murk of London's fog, and left behind, if not happiness, at least clarity. As he himself remarked on the final evening, with that air of wry philosophy so peculiarly his own, "Ghosts, Watson, are never of the dead. They are only the living, burdened with truths too long denied."